Good morning, brothers and sisters. So glad to see you here this morning. I'm not sure if you're all aware, but today, August the 24th, is a special day because it's an initiative that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has taken to create awareness and to take some action with regards to abuse. Unfortunately, in our world, abuse doesn't care about religion, it doesn't care about gender, it doesn't care about race. It's everywhere. And as a church, we consider it very, very important to stand up against abuse, to stand up against violence, and to, as a church, create safety for its members. Not only its members, but for the community at large as well. So today, the topic that I'll be talking about is along the lines of this initiative. This initiative is called End It Now. So this is not something happening only in our church, but across the world. And it's, again, the Seventh-day Adventist Church's attempt to try to do something about it. Unfortunately, we know that the devil is always busy and wants to destroy God's people, wants to destroy humanity. And so this is the little part that we can play in trying to put an end to this, creating awareness as well. So please join me as we talk about this difficult topic and what we can do as a church, what role we have as a church. I want to introduce you to Fiona. Fiona was dubbed the loneliest sheep in the world. Now, that's not Fiona. Fiona is a little older, and she was dubbed the loneliest sheep in the world, and her story made headlines all around the world. You see, because Fiona was stuck at the bottom of a cliff that was 90 meters, and it's roughly around 300, just under 300 feet, off the coast of Scotland, okay? So Scotland has a lot of sheep farmers, and Fiona, when she was very little, somehow made her way down to the cliff. And you know, it's easier to go down a cliff than to go up a cliff. So Fiona had been stuck there for around 2 or 3 years. People weren't sure. There had been some attempts at rescuing her, but they hadn't been successful. So she had found a cave, and there was plenty of grass. I don't know if you've ever seen those cliffs off the coast of Scotland. That's one of my husband's favorite places in the world. They're just green, and you feel like you're on top of the world. It's very cold as well. And here Fiona had found a little cave where she could be protected from the elements, and there was plenty of grass. And there was plenty of water as well for her. Thankfully, she didn't go into the ocean, otherwise she would have died. So, you might have heard about Shrek in New Zealand. That was also a sheep that had been lost for about 3 years, I think. And so when these farmers found Fiona, they found the sheep, they called her Fiona. So this team of 5 farmers decided to rescue her. And they had, all sorts of equipment. They had drones, they had ropes, they had a winch. And with the manpower, they were going to hoist Fiona up those 90 meters. So it's not just 90 meters, it's 90 meters like this. They're pretty much vertical. Okay? And Fiona was a big girl, and she was heavy. Remember that she had a lot of grass to eat, and she hadn't been sheared in 3 years, okay? That's a lot for a sheep. In fact, Fiona had never been sheared because she was lost when she was a little lamb. The Scottish SPCA said they weren't able to rescue her because it was too risky. The Coast Guard didn't want to get involved either. Fire and Rescue said, no, we're not sending men down there. There's too high of a chance for human injuries. And so the 5 farmers said, okay, we've got to do this. And by the way, with all the wool that she had, she weighed around 100 kilos. They didn't know this at the time, but this is a big girl we're talking about. 3 of the farmers had to pick her up together from her wool, and together they put her in a massive, what I would describe as a tote bag, like a really, really massive tote bag, and they strapped her in. They had to tie her legs together because so she wouldn't be thrashing around in that bag. And they attached the ropes and started hoisting her up. This task took many hours, and when she finally reached the top of the cliff, the farmers literally rejoiced at what a good sheep she had been, what a majestic animal she was, and what a strong breed she was. They were concerned about how stressed she might be from her ride up and from the whole ordeal. And they gave her some medication to relax her. Once she was a little bit more settled, around 24 hours later, one of the farmers sheared her. Obviously, these are very, very experienced farmers. He sheared her, but he said he felt so much pressure shearing her because she had never been shorn, and he didn't want to hurt her. All the wool that had been taken off weighed quite a few kilos. Anybody want to take a guess? 3 years worth of wool. 40? That's a lot. No, it was 8.6 kilos of wool. Can you imagine that, carrying that on your back? She was taken to her forever home and is now thriving. So don't worry, Fiona's okay. She's got like 3 million followers on social media. She's fine. Our story today is about finding the sheep. Let's go to Matthew 18, verse 11. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. You all know the parable of the lost sheep. I remember teaching it to my kids when they were little, teaching it in Sabbath school. I don't think there's a single person here who hasn't heard the parable of the lost sheep. And there's 2 places in the Bible where we can find it. One in Matthew, as we can see, Matthew 18, and the other part is in Luke 15. Both writers give a vivid description, and they really emphasize the actions the shepherd took, and the shepherd's joy and the celebration that takes place when the sheep returns, right? Let's go to the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 15, verses 3 to 6. And this depiction of the story of the lost sheep, we can see God's heart of joy, how much he rejoices and his celebration of the lost sheep when the sheep returns. Luke 15, verses 3 to 6. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my sheep." Then we go to the Gospel of Matthew. And Matthew emphasizes that the father, the shepherd, doesn't want a single sheep to perish. Matthew 18, verse 14 says, "Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish." Why was the sheep lost? Have you ever thought about that? The emphasis we put on the story is always about the shepherd, and it should be, because the shepherd was the one who took the initiative to save the sheep. But have you ever asked yourself, how did the sheep get lost? How did Fiona get lost? This little lamb. Running away, maybe. Little by little. Okay. Maybe it wandered off. Maybe it was left behind. Maybe nobody saw it. Maybe the little lamb or the sheep lost sight of the others. Or maybe it couldn't continue following because it couldn't keep up, or because it stumbled, or because it fell. Try to imagine the sheep feeling lost and alone, away from the community of the 99 sheep. Maybe the sheep was shunned. You know, animals sometimes do that. They will shun one of the members that is maybe a little weaker. Maybe that's what happened. Did you know, well, I'm sure you know that sheep are a species that are considered prey. They're not predators, okay? So when you are a species that is prey, what you do is you run. You run. That's your defense. You run. You can't turn around and attack your predator. You run. So did the lost sheep maybe feel some kind of threat and it just started running and then it got lost? Think about that. So, you know that this parable is to teach us that how God rejoices over a sinner that comes back to his flock. His flock is the church. The thing is, research shows that the number one reason why people leave the church, why that wandering sheep is lost, the number one reason is relationship issues. It's a social reason. That means that it involves you and I. Some of those reasons within the relational factors are perceived hypocrisy, different kinds of conflict, broken relationships, lack of friends, or lack of support. However, although some members keep coming to the church, they also feel neglected or left behind or misunderstood or maybe not included. Maybe forgotten by people and God. You know, that is how many victims of abuse feel in our church congregations, lost and alone. For example, the woman sharing her experience of domestic abuse, or the family reeling from the disclosure of sexual abuse, or the young person coming to grips with being groomed, another victim being molested at a church event, lost and alone. Maybe that's the lost sheep. The Lord points to the reasons why some sheep are scattered. Ezekiel 34, verse 3 and 4 says, "You do not feed the flock. The weak you have not strengthened, nor have you healed those who were sick, nor bound up the broken, nor brought back what was driven away, nor sought what was lost." More than ever, abuse victims need to know that Jesus cares about them. And that's where we come in. Because you know what? We are the hands and feet of Jesus. Jesus is not physically here on earth, but he has us. Okay? We are to carry out that mission of caring for those lost sheep. The shepherd is looking for people to help go in search of the lost. He is also looking for people who will strengthen the weak, bind up the broken, and help the wounded. In their book, How People Grow, Drs. Henry Cloud and John Townsend talk about the importance of community for a person's growth. Community is what holds people together, a sense of belonging. And by the way, just a fun fact about sheep. Did you know that sheep are very gregarious? That's why they always move around in flocks. They're very gregarious, and whenever they are isolated from other sheep or alone for whatever reason, they get super stressed out. They even go into panic because they're very gregarious animals. In fact, I was reading up a little bit more about this, and vets say that if a sheep is alone for whatever reason, that you can use mirrors to put around the sheep so that the sheep at least has a sense of having other sheep around it, because it is so devastating for a sheep to be on its own. We are humans and we're very gregarious. We are wired for connection. And so when we are alone, we have to be very careful. That's a red flag. We have to be very, very careful. We are needed. We need to help each other and we need to help the one sheep to heal and feel part of the community. And sometimes in the case of abuse, our silence can be interpreted as indifference. And it's true, we don't always know how to act when somebody discloses a situation of abuse. But sometimes that silence can show up as indifference and maybe that we don't care. And it leaves people feeling even worse. Others who are struggling in an abusive relationship realize from the attitude of others that it's best if they do not disclose the abuse nor the abuser. Also, the distraction and the validity of why the sheep became lost often diverts attention from the issue itself. We want to try to understand the why. Okay? But abusers conclude that the church is a safe place where they can continue harming others because nobody's going to speak up. Nobody's going to say anything because this doesn't happen in church. We don't want to get the police involved. It's going to cause too much of a scandal. Our name will be thrown under the bus. No. And that doesn't create safety in our church. Or worse, what I think is much worse for the person who has disclosed abuse, is when we rush to tell people to forgive others, to forgive their perpetrator, to forgive their abuser, and move on. There's a time and a place for forgiveness. But as Adventists, we are very quick to let's just go to the forgiveness part and move on. And that doesn't create safety. The Bible actually gives us very clear instructions of how we can talk to people, or how can we react to people who come and share these tragedies in their lives with us. Let's go to Romans 12, verses 10 and 15. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love. In honor, giving preference to one another. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. It doesn't say anything about rush to forgiveness. When an injury happens in a place where care should be administered, it is confusing to the victim, sending them into a tailspin, because victims of abuse often struggle with an eroding sense of self, and they are second-guessing themselves all the time. So there has to be safety in our church. Many times people don't know what to do when there's disclosure of abuse, and many err on the side of caution. Unfortunately, this results in ostracizing the victim and making them feel even more alone in what they're going through. Jane was married to a popular evangelist. She had a beautiful family that looked good on the outside. And we can all relate to this, right? We come to church, and I'm not saying that everybody's going through abuse situations, but what I'm saying is that we are used to coming to church and putting up a front, a facade, okay? How are you? Good. How was your week? Very good, right? And we're putting up a front. Jane was no different. However, Jane suffered physical, sexual, and financial abuse for many years. After years of praying and receiving counsel from people in her church and enduring all this silently, Jane decided to leave her husband. Jane was the Sabbath school superintendent when she decided to leave her relationship and find safety for herself and for her children. After Jane left the marriage, the church felt that she was no longer capable of being in a leadership role, so they took her out of that Sabbath school superintendent role. She was forced to resign her position. As well, there was gossip going on in the background. People were gossiping about her. And so she was kind of shunned socially. She lost the respect of her peers. Jane was told such things as, if you had prayed more, Or if you had fasted more, this wouldn't have happened to you. He would have changed. Church became unbearable, and she quit going. At times, Jane felt like God had also left her. No one sought her out. No one saw the need to protect her, to look after her. She was no longer able to cope with staying at that church, and so she tried to go to another church, but she was disconnected from her church home. Many find those whispered conversations going on in the background and the frosty distance of once loving people unbearable. The victim's prayer is not a guarantee that an abuser will stop abusing. We know, unfortunately, that part of God's government includes freedom of choice, and God doesn't force anybody that doesn't want to follow him. So ultimately, the stopping the abuse rests with the perpetrator's ability to hear and to respond to God. Jane struggled to find a church where she felt safe. Jane became the lost sheep, and so did her children, who were at the crucial stages of their Christian journey. The confusion and loss of their church home, and in some cases, friends, greatly impacted their ability to trust God. Children like Jane's are often never sought out in a meaningful way. Their experiences are ignored, almost as if the church struggles with what to do when we bring back a lost sheep. But we do have some examples from the life and the work of Jesus and what to do in those circumstances. Isaiah 61 verse 1 says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness the prisoners." Verses 2 and 3, "To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all those who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor." So that's how the Lord responds. He was the actual fulfillment of that prophecy. That's what he came to do, to heal the brokenhearted, to heal those wounds. We also have an example in the Psalms. Psalms 147 verse 3, "He heals the brokenhearted. He binds up their wounds." And as imitators of Christ, this should be our role too, right? It is clear the healing of broken hearts and providing comfort to the wounded is crucial as disciples of Jesus. We are called to find, to feed, to comfort, and help heal his sheep. As a church, we can respond in love to the impact of abuse, ending the tragic loss of life and ending the physical, social, mental, and economic impact of abuse. Because once the abuse is disclosed, yes, everything changes. And our job is to help people be able to rebuild their lives. The shepherd left the 99 others to search high and low for the lost sheep. Jesus stresses that when the shepherd finds the lost sheep, he actually rejoices over it. And that's something that caught my attention when I was learning about Fiona and when I actually watched the video of the rescue. How these farmers were so happy with Fiona. She's just a sheep. In fact, she had just gone astray. She had cost them a lot of time, energy, risk, but they were so happy. They celebrated this sheep. They kept on oohing and awing about how majestic of an animal she was. And Fiona hadn't done anything except get lost. But the shepherd, when he finds the sheep, he rejoices, he puts it on his shoulders and takes it home together with the other sheep. It's a powerful imagery of the loving, attentive shepherd who will do whatever it takes to find his sheep and bring it home. How do we show that we care when that one sheep comes home? Do we say, Fiona, I told you so. Don't go off wandering. Or do we say, Fiona, you have yourself to blame for your lifestyle choices. You got yourself into this. Or do we say, Fiona, you shouldn't have worn those clothes if you didn't want that to happen to you? Or, Fiona, are you sure you're not just taking this the wrong way? It's not like he's such a bad person. So how do we show we care? We listen without judgment. We choose not to ostracize the victim after a disclosure of abuse. We provide warmth, comfort, and the authentic support that promotes healing. We speak out about the dangers of abuse. We hold perpetrators accountable, and we work to make sure our church is a safe community. Desmond Tutu, who was involved in the reconciliation process after apartheid in South Africa, said the following: if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Many times, I don't want to get involved. This is a tricky situation. I'm not really sure what to do. Why don't you go talk to, somebody else? We want to get it out of the way. We don't want to say anything. It's going to create too much of a fuss if we contact the police. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Abuse is not a subject on which the church can be silent, because people's lives are ruined and destroyed. We are to be a refuge and healing for victims. Obviously, there's, like I said at the beginning, abuse is not, or violence is not just against a specific gender or a specific race or a specific socioeconomic status. No, it's across the board. So don't ever think, we're exempt. It doesn't happen here. It happens, and people are silent about it. And in situations of trauma or abuse, there's two kinds of traumas that can take place. One is the trauma of the actual abuse taking place, but then the second trauma can happen in what we call the telling. And the telling is when the person chooses to disclose what has happened. Our reaction to the telling can be just as traumatic as the abuse itself. So we have to be very careful when somebody shares this private information, how we react. We have to be warm, non-judgmental, and we have to be accepting. The shepherd of the parable is a great example. He took one simple step. He went in search of the lost sheep. And sometimes going in search of the lost sheep means things like sitting with them and hearing their voices, their stories, allowing them to tell their story as they experienced it. Okay, not questioning whether what they're saying is true or not. There's professionals who can assess whether that's right or wrong, but you as a church, as a place of safety, this is what we can do. Listening without filters or biases. Okay? Listening without judgment. Hearing the story as it is, not as we would like it to be. Bringing the lost sheep to church events. Sitting together in church to show your support. Including them in your circle of friends. Being there with them. Reassuring them. People need reassurance. One of the things that impacted me about the story of Fiona is how these farmers who you think, they're tough and they're not particularly nurturing or gentle. But when they, especially one of them that was shearing Fiona or was one of the main characters and bringing her up, he would constantly talk to Fiona in his Scottish accent. I can't imitate it. so forgive me. But he would say something, as soon as he noticed that she was getting a little bit more stressed out or she needed to relax a little bit, he would say, "It's okay, lass. You're all right, lass." He was constantly reassuring. And you know what? That's something that we can do. We can reassure people who have gone through tragedy, through trauma, through difficult circumstances. Reassure them that they're going to be okay and that this is a safe place. Often we hear stories of people feeling lost and alone in the middle of the church congregation. There can be lost sheep in here, in the middle of our congregations. They learn to mask their pain because experience has taught them that pain and truthfulness is not acceptable. Jack seems like one of the 99 sheep in the fold, but he lives on the fringes of church. He attends, but not completely involved. He cannot seem to shake the anger in his heart. He has heard countless sermons on forgiveness and has tried countless times to forgive, but like the anger, the pain of abuse lingers and sometimes threatens to overtake him. Jack has been told many times that the problem is his unforgiving heart. It's that we take it upon ourselves to make these things teaching moments and wag our fingers at people. Your problem is that you haven't forgiven. But the real problem is that Jack was groomed when he was a young boy and molested by another church member. At the time, families met, and the resolution to the problem was forgiveness. Let's just forgive and move on. That is not repair. That is not reconciliation. However, no one counted the cost of abuse to Jack, and he's lived in shame with low self-esteem for as long as he can remember. He is present, but he feels just as much need of the Good Shepherd as Jane. He needs to encounter the heart of the shepherd through the interaction and thoughtful consideration of other members in the church. For most survivors, forgiveness and healing are two separate issues. For Jack, forgiveness meant that the church member kept his position, but that Jack lost his friends. And this should not be so. Forgiveness should not exclude consequences, okay? Especially in such serious cases. And friends should not leave the wounded sheep. Although Jack now attends another church, the story followed him. He is lost and alone in a sea of faces every week. Brothers and sisters, love requires accountability. Okay? We might love somebody with our whole heart, and they still need to be accountable. Love doesn't mean that we gloss over things and we don't deal with the hard issues that come up in our church. That doesn't create safety. So what are the next steps? If we are to find the lost, we also need to know what to do with them when they return. Abuse has been a growing problem in the world for a long time. And if we keep our heads buried, we're not dealing with it. And if we keep our heads buried, doesn't mean it's going to go away or that it's not happening. It's happening. Authentic listening is a key tool that can be used in offering support. Often victims need someone who is caring enough to listen, again, without judgment. When we face the reality of the issue, we can, number one, put plans in place to find the lost. We can cultivate an environment with zero tolerance for abuse. That goes back to the accountability piece. Say no to violence and work together to end it now. Support victims of abuse, breaking the silence that it happens in our churches as well as our communities. Help them heal. Remember that our church is a hospital. We're not perfect. We're far from perfect. Let's go to Ezekiel 34, verses 5 and 6. The Lord says to Ezekiel, so they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And they became food for all the beasts of the field when they were scattered. That shows vulnerability. When you are prey out there by yourself. My sheep wandered through all the mountains and on every high hill. Yes, my flock was scattered over the whole face of the earth, and no one was seeking or searching for them. Jesus is calling us today to go find his sheep. What's your response? Will it be, I don't want to get involved? But sometimes the victim doesn't really ask you if you want to get involved or not. If you're a person of trust, they will come to you and you are automatically involved. So, are you willing to be part of Jesus' big campaign of seeking for his lost sheep and caring for the wounded sheep? If you respond, and will you respond saying, yes, Jesus, I will go? If that is your prayer and that's the desire of your heart, I invite you to bow your head with me as we ask Jesus to guide us. Heavenly Father, there's so much suffering in this earth, and that's why we know that we want you to come soon, because this earth is just full of wickedness and so much violence and suffering and despair and abuse. And Lord, your church is not exempt from that. We are in this world, but we're not of it, but we do suffer the consequences of sin. And Lord, as your people, we want to be your hands and feet. And we do say, I will go. I will be that person who helps others feel safe, feel protected in our church, and do whatever it takes to end this now. Lord, give us wisdom to know what to do, to know what to say, to know how to act. And may everything that we do be to your honor and your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.